Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host,
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the recent support and viewership on our content. If you did not know, today is our 2-year anniversary of this podcast, and we wouldn't be able to do this without you guys. I know you probably want to say something as well, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, our channel had grown pretty quickly over the last couple of years, right? Obviously, we had that stretch during the Olympics where we got, a ridiculous amount of growth. I think, at least quadrupled our total amount of subscribers, and that's good to see because that means the channel is growing. And we couldn't have done it without everybody, so it's always nice to kind of see the support grow and everything like that. So, it's nice to know that, it's 2 years have passed and we're still here and we're, still going up.
Yeah, it went lightning quick. It was crazy. But before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so we actually had I would say, great last few days of basketball. Just a ton of just amazing matchups. And obviously with a lot of these matchups, not all of them necessarily have implications now, because I think we understand and we know and understand that with the regular season, oftentimes, I know a lot of people talk about how little it matters oftentimes, but I think a lot of these matchups were pretty significant just because you're talking about some of these teams have been going into these important stretches where we kind of want to see what they got, right? Because we know, say, for example, a team like the Cavs, right? They had been playing well and they had that road trip, but we got to see a couple other teams, kind of find their way and kind of duke it out. For example, we got to see the Celtics. They've been on a Western Conference road trip, right? They got a few matchups, against the Timberwolves, right, which they won. They got to win against the Rockets. But then they had a game, and this was actually today as we were recording. We're recording on Sunday, against the Oklahoma City Thunder, right? And this was big because Oklahoma City had been on a homestand, right, for 5 straight games where they've basically kind of been playing a pretty good combination of good teams, right? They had played, they had just beaten the Knicks a couple days before, and some other teams prior to that. But this was obviously a big measuring stick because you're talking about 2 teams that could possibly make the NBA Finals. This is the finals matchup that I have. I have the Celtics winning it. But the Oklahoma City Thunder ended up winning this game 105-92, and they were able to do it in the way that they've pretty much done it all year with their defense. The first half, actually, the Celtics were, lighting up the Thunder in the first half, and they built up, at one point, a double-digit lead in the second quarter, but they were up by as much as 13, right? I think they finished the quarters up 10, 65-55. In the second half, Oklahoma City held the Celtics to just 27 points, and you just didn't really get, a whole lot of offensive production from Boston in the second half. I mean, they finished the game 9 of 46 from 3, 19%, 36% from the field. Meanwhile, Oklahoma City was at 45 from the field, 42 from 3. SGA leads the way with 33 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, 2 blocks after a great performance against the Knicks. He's been great pretty much all season, obviously. I feel like I got him right now as the possible winner for MVP, but this was huge because, again, you're talking about no Chet Holmgren, also no Alex Caruso. You're going against a healthy Celtics team. I know they've had guys in and out due to injury, but it's nice to know that, again, OKC ended up winning this matchup, and you can kind of see some of the areas where they could potentially match up well against the Celtics in the finals. I don't think you can expect the Celtics to shoot this poorly. Most of it was in the second half, but if you're the Oklahoma City Thunder, you got to feel good, and they have a better record than them right now. So it's possible that should they face each other in the finals, they might have, they might have home court, because it's basically them and the Cavs, for the 2 best records in the NBA.
Yeah, like you said, this was a very important game. I think it was a little bit more important for OKC because, I talked about it last episode. I think Boston is kind of cruising a little bit, but, regardless, like you said, huge statement win because Chet Holmgren was not available and you still were able to pull out a huge W. So I think you feel pretty confident in what a lot of these guys can provide, especially off the bench. That's kind of what impressed me a lot. You had some great performances like Aaron Wiggins, came in and did his thing. But I do kind of want to see more from Oklahoma City Thunder. Like, this means a lot, but it doesn't kind of, squash all my very little doubts about how far this team can truly go, because I think I have them coming out of the Western Conference as well.
Yeah.
So, I think we do believe that this team can go pretty far. It's just a matter of, do we believe that they can win the title? And as of right now, probably not, just because I don't want to harp on one guy, but I think you need a lot more from J Dub. I think he needs to be either a true number two or number three consistently in, night out. And you didn't really get that this game.
Yeah.
But that's the cool thing about this team. They're so deep, in other aspects of their roster, that sometimes, you can get away with a Jalen Williams game like this.
Yeah, in this game you got away with it kind of because you had Aaron Wiggins, right,
Yeah.
who had also had a great game against the New York Knicks
Mm-hmm.
in their previous matchup. Kaysen Wallace, right, made some big plays in the fourth quarter. Lou
Mm-hmm.
Dort hit the two dagger threes.
Mm-hmm.
But and like you said, that's nice for a game. It's just obviously in a best of seven. Like you said, you kind of need, a better performance, from Jalen Williams. And it feels like in some of these big games, he's not always there, but hey, I mean, they've won 15 in a row.
Yeah.
Because the cup loss against the Bucks doesn't count, because that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't count towards any regular season wins. And it's kind of wild, right? Because the Bucks, in contrast, have, kind of been, since the NBA Cup, not really that great. They're 500 in their last 10. But post Cup, I believe that the stat is they are 3-5, which isn't terrible. And to be fair, some of those games Giannis did not play. I think there were a couple of games where both him and Lillard did not play.
Yeah.
So, but the last couple of games that they lost, both of them were there. Lost to the Nets, and I believe they lost to the Blazers as well. So they're still kind of hovering around 500. But like with the Celtics, outside of the OKC loss, they had been pretty good on this road trip, because again,
Yeah.
they took care of the Minnesota Timberwolves, and that was without Brown and Porzingis. Right, then they took care of the Rockets. I know the Rockets unfortunately just had, they just lost Jabari Smith Jr. for at least, a month plus, right, with a fractured hand and a shoot around. But the Celtics, like you said, it seems like they've been cruising, but they're still pretty good, right? Because like they had, in the midst of these last few games, yeah, they lost Oklahoma City, but they beat Houston by 23. Obviously, they beat the Wolves. They were up by a decent amount. Then the Wolves fought back. They've kind of been a tough story, and we'll get to them momentarily. And then they also beat the Raptors by 54 in that last home game before their trip. So they have one more road game against the Nuggets, right? That's kind of another, good matchup as well, right? Because the Nuggets swept them in the regular season last year, and that was kind of the team that a lot of people before Boston kind of picked as the favorite.
Yeah.
So, just in general, this is kind of a good trip for them. So if they can go, 3-1 here, right? So if they take care of Denver, which they can, right? Because Aaron Gordon isn't going to play, and it seems like they got all their guys back. So if they take care of Denver, that's a good road trip, and I think that's a good, solid measuring stick for where it seems like the Celtics are at. They are 26-10, so now they've hit double-digit losses. But I know they played kind of uneven basketball as of late, but I still think come playoff time, I think they'll be fine. It's just
Yeah.
obviously for them, it's going to be more difficult, and that's what we talked about. Like they can still win the title. I know you don't have them winning it, but like they still can win it. It's just not going to be quite as, they're not going to be able to kind of ravage through everybody the way that they did last season.
Yeah. It's not as clear cut. I agree.
No. Yeah, but I think that, when push comes to shove, I think they're still going to be the favorites. But I think, like you said, if anything, it's a bigger game for Oklahoma City, because that's the team that I don't think quite as many people are sold on.
Yep.
Just because, we need to see them do more.
Yep.
But for them, they haven't even had Chet Holmgren play in a while, so that's kind of the cool part is they've been playing so well, especially on defense, and that's without one of their best defensive players. So, you get that guy back at some point, whenever that is, and they should be cooking. So I think that's pretty good, I think, from that perspective. And, again, I think this was, a pretty good game, I would say. Obviously OKC ended up winning it by double digits, but it was, the second half, once OKC cut into that gap, it was pretty back and forth.
Yeah. 30-5 is nothing to scoff at,
Yeah. Then we had a pair of games between two teams, which this is always kind of interesting, where it was a back-to-back for both teams. One on one opponent's floor, and then the other on the other. And we had back-to-back games against the Spurs and the Nuggets, both close, both competitive games. With the first one on Friday, right, the Spurs ended up taking 113-110, right, with Jokic having 41-18-9 on the losing side for the Nuggets, and Wemby having 35-18-4. for the Spurs, right? This was the game where Devin Vassell kind of ended up being the hero late in the game. He got a couple of key steals, including the go-ahead dunk, right? Because they doubled Jokic right at the end. They had Wemby on him, and they still sent a double team. Jokic ends up throwing it away, and then Vassell goes down for the dunk, pretty much closes out the game, despite, a fantastic game from Jokic. Then they have the rematch the next day, right? And the Nuggets end up winning that one in overtime, 122-111. And this one was led by, Jokic again, except this time he had 46 points, so an even more ridiculous performance, in a season where he's having a lot of ridiculous performances. But with Wemby, obviously he's, starring as well, right? And we talked about how earlier in the season he kind of was struggling to begin the season, but he's obviously since then he's been very good, right? And in fact, as a matter of fact, honestly, we talked about it going into the season. If he knocks on the door of top 10 or he's in that door, then that's how you get the Spurs to be a potential playing team. They're in the playing mix right now. We don't know if they're going to make it, but a big reason why they're in that playing run right now is because of him and his play, where it feels like every game he's giving you worst case scenario 20 and 10 with 4 blocks basically, and a bevy of shots from pretty much just everywhere. And then you got some good contributions from some of the veteran guys like a Harrison Barnes, a Chris Paul, and then the young guys will show up at times as well, right? Like Vassell and Castle. So they got a good mix of guys, especially on the defensive end. Obviously, the offense is a little bit more of a struggle. But, again, it was a great stretch of basketball from both teams. And it was, again, both teams ended up splitting, and both teams, ideally, you'd like to win both. Because, again, the Spurs are in the play-in mix. The Nuggets are kind of trying to fight to stay afloat, in that playoff sphere, right? Because they're basically right there with, like LA and Dallas, right? For that 4-6 spot. And the Clippers, who are also right there. And that'll be kind of a fun race to see where that goes. But just, what did you think of these two matchups? Because obviously this is not going to be more than likely a playoff matchup, or a finals matchup. Obviously isn't happening at all. But, it's always a cool matchup because you're talking about, a guy that's perceived to be the best player in the league, best center in the league, and then the other guy who's going to be on the up and up, who's already, like I said, entering that, top 10 tier.
Yeah, I think both of these teams and individuals proved a lot. In my opinion, I think Jokic once again is kind of making that big case that he could be, another MVP or win another MVP. But then you have Wemby, who, like you said, is really, I think he's got his foot in the door being top 10 because of what he provides night in, night out. It's just, these teams are very different. They're in different spots in terms of, their timelines and stuff like that. But Jokic continues to really just put the team on his back, and I'm kind of disappointed that they didn't win the first one. So hats off to the Spurs for, being able to close that one out. But, winning the second one, I think mattered a lot to the Denver Nuggets because, like you said, every win really counts for this team, no matter who it's against. So, they're in a state where they can't really afford to drop games against teams that are arguably and obviously worse than them. So, I think there were some things that I liked, from Jokic, obviously, and there were some things that I liked from other guys as well. Like, I think Michael Porter Jr. had a very solid outing in the second game. But, that bench, it continues to just not really provide, the craziest of things. I mean, I guess, defensively, I'm not, super low on them, but offensively, I'm like, geez, guys, can we get something going? But, they continue to struggle a little bit. But overall, 2 solid games and very surprisingly entertaining. But then again, like you said, it's the former MVP and the young guy who's very hungry. So, box office stuff.
Yeah. Then, you get a couple other matchups and a little bit more on the negative side, right? Where you had a couple of bad Suns performances, right? Where you had the one where they lost to the Indiana Pacers, right? And then of course the one where they lost to the Grizzlies. And obviously some of this will, comes on the heels of the Jimmy Butler stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I guess, we'll get into that before we get into some of the other games, just so that way we don't bury the lead here. But, we talked about this on Thursday, right? The episode was on Friday, but we recorded it on Thursday, and we talked about, the Butler situation, right? And right around the end of our recording, right, there were quotes that came out of the game from Jimmy Butler, right, talking about, how he's not really enjoying his time there. Lo and behold, the next day, he's suspended from the Heat for 7 games, right? And, basically they put out a press release basically saying, yeah, it's very clear he does not want to be a part of this team anymore, and they're essentially open and ready and willing to listen to all offers. And we kind of said that this was probably going to happen, right? Where
Hmm.
even though we knew the reporting about how, Pat Riley said, we're not trading Jimmy Butler, right? We didn't really believe that.
Yep.
It was kind of back and forth. Me more so, I have a difficulty of figuring out where he's going to go. I think that's kind of the first thing. Like, I don't feel like there's an obvious team that he's going to be traded to. It could be Golden State. It could be Houston. It could be Phoenix. We don't know. But obviously, I think the biggest thing that is for sure is I think at this point it's safe to say that he will not be a Miami Heat again. I know it's the 7 games, and obviously, like, that's essentially a couple weeks. So in theory, he could be quote unquote back, during the second half of this month. But even if like he's still on the team when the suspension is lifted, I don't think we'll see him on the Heat again. Like, I just think at this point, like, he's made it ugly, and once that happens, you can't really come back from that, right? And I think this is pretty much done. Which, again, funny enough, last summer we were in the camp already of, yeah, they should probably trade him and move on. And I think we talked about it, like, from the moment they didn't get Lillard, and then their season didn't really go, I think, as well as they would have liked it to. They lost in the first round to Boston. Then obviously Pat Riley had made the comments about Butler after he said what he said about, we would have beaten those teams if he was healthy. That was it. Then they didn't pay him. And I can understand kind of where both sides are coming from, because I can understand Butler's perspective of, hey, I got this team to 2 NBA finals, and now you're not going to pay me and take care of me. But I can also, and it's not like those teams were great, but I also can understand the Miami Heat's perspective of, hey, you haven't been as available as of late. And with the new CBA, it just becomes a lot more difficult to kind of do this type of stuff now. It's just a matter of, again, where the heck is he going to go, and what is he going for? Because I think we know at this point, like, we know teams are not going to offer a lot for the Heat, but you got to be able to cobble together 50 million worth of salaries in order to make this work. And I just don't know which team is actually going to do that.
Yeah, I'm thinking that we're probably looking at a 3-team trade. That's the only thing that really makes sense to me. I think he probably ends up going to the Warriors. That's like my prediction. Somehow, some way. I'm assuming like a team like Brooklyn will probably get involved. But yeah, what a freaking situation, and it blew up like we literally said. We were like, this is gonna get ugly, and it did quite literally. And it's crazy to think that he got suspended over the poor performance, that was pretty blatantly on purpose. And it's funny that I think he's appealing it to the NBA
Yeah,
Players Association is appealing that suspension. So that's, I guess, another thing to watch. But regardless, yeah,
he's
Pat
going to be
Riley
looking at.
versus, yeah, exactly. Pat Riley versus Jimmy Butler is crazy. Like, this is really freaking toxic. But yeah, like you said, I think Jimmy Butler's played his last game in Miami. But what a dumpster fire way to go out. Because I mean, I do understand, like you said, from his perspective, he probably sees it as disrespect. The fact that
Right.
he was able to provide all these playoff runs on his back, but then you do have to look at it from a perspective of you're aging. Can you do it again? Most likely not. So I understand from a business perspective, but also from a personal level, you do kind of owe people respect. But Pat Riley's been notorious for not really respecting players like that. Not saying like that he's disrespectful or anything like that, but in terms of paying guys, not really.
Right. Yeah, and then that's kind of the thing here is that, I think this obviously, and people have talked about it, right? This, I think, like I said, started with not giving him the contract, and once
Yeah.
that happened, then it was a problem. And again, once we started hearing the rumors last summer, right, about like, oh, maybe he could go to Golden State, maybe he could go to, Philly if they don't sign Paul George, or maybe he could go, to wherever other teams they kind of mentioned at that point. Like I said, you just knew that this was going to happen. So
Yeah.
it's a situation to watch out for. I don't even really want to predict where he goes, because I legitimately just don't know. Because even with the Warriors, I just don't know. I just have a hard time like believing that they're gonna give up all that stuff, but they could. And in fairness to them, we got word a few hours ago that Kaminga is going to be out for at least a few weeks because he sprained his ankle. They played 2 games, one against the Grizzlies without Steph, in which they won. Kaminga got hurt in that game. They're playing against the Kings right now, and they're down by almost 30 in the third, but we'll see how that goes. But um, since with him being out for a few weeks, I do kind of wonder, does that potentially change at all, right? Golden State's approach to the deadline, because now if he's going to be out for at least 3 weeks, well, that gets you pretty close to the trade deadline, right? Like by the time he comes back, you'll probably, assuming he comes back actually in 3 weeks, you'll only probably have like a week or so before the deadline, because that's like what, February 6th.
Hmm.
So, and they've talked, and there's been like kind of, some stuff that's come out about like they don't really want to do it, and that it probably is more likely that they make a smaller deal for like a Vucevic or something. And again, the tough part for them contractually is they're in the first apron, but also very close to the hard cap. So if they make any deal that involves sending out multiple players, in order to fill up those roster spots, they're going to have to get pretty close to the hard cap. So it could be something that if they do it, it may just not happen until right at the end, so that way they can, sign guys for a prorated amount. I'm not sure, but this is going to be a situation to watch. And at the very least, considering nobody has said like that he has specific teams that he wants to go to, kind of like, what it was kind of hinted at before, he could go anywhere. It's just a matter of, which teams are actually going to trade for him. Because we know that there's already going to be at least, a third of teams that probably won't trade for him, right? Like we know, most of the teams that are already in the championship mix are unlikely to deal for him because they don't really need him, right? Like, you're not trading for him if you're Boston or if you're Cleveland. Probably, not the Knicks. But again, there's a couple of sleeper teams, right? And one of them I had been thinking about for a little bit was the Grizzlies, because people have talked about could they potentially be like a team that trades for him. Obviously, it is kind of a weird fit, but at least it's a scenario of like in terms of the players they're giving up, most of those guys would probably be some of the role players, and you don't like, and I could see them possibly doing some type of consolidation deal. I just don't know if they would actually do it. Obviously, with the Grizzlies, they're going to be without Ja for a little bit, but I think that could potentially be a sleeper team. But as for like where I think he's going to go, I don't know. I really couldn't tell you. I mean, like, I don't really like saying I don't know, but I just can't really guess because because I know that he's going to go somewhere, because there's always going to be teams that are going to talk themselves into the idea of it. I'm just not sure which one it will be. I don't know if it'll be Golden State. I could be wrong, but I don't know. I mean, is there a team other than Golden State that you're looking at where you like it? Or is it more so just like kind of like the best of, whatever you got?
I mean, I don't really like him going anywhere, to be honest. Like
Mhm.
I don't know. Like, cuz what are the teams that could possibly get him? Like the front runners
Right.
are Golden State,
Hmm.
Houston, like who else outside of them? We've
Yeah.
heard a lot about Phoenix. I don't like that at all. Houston, like I said, I don't think
Mhm.
they should pull the trigger on something like that. I think you should continue to watch the internal development of your young guys, but I don't know.
Dallas isn't feasible. Like that's just not like one
No.
that I think. I mean, I guess they could technically do it, but they'd have to give up a lot of key guys, and I don't think they do that. I think that's just kind of one of those teams where it's just kind of a name, but not
Yeah.
really like an actual location that's gonna happen, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like in
Yeah,
other
but
teams you'd have to involve a third team and we already know how complicated that gets.
yeah.
So,
Right. Yeah, the Sun situation though is kind of also, just beyond the Butler situation, just in general, the Sun situation is getting pretty rough because now they've lost 4 in a row.
yep.
Which I was kind of talking about before we got into the Butler stuff, where they've lost the first loss, right, was against the Mavs without Luca, then a loss to Golden State, in which, that was the game where Kaminga kind of took over late in the game. Then the loss to the Grizzlies without, Ja and a few other guys like Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. played, but they only had 9 available guys. Then a blowout loss to the Pacers. Um, it's tough because this is a team that we talked about at the beginning of the season, the first 10 games, where they look like a legitimate, contender. And then since then, they've just completely fallen apart. I know they've had, some bad luck in terms of injuries, but it hasn't really been much different from last season. And they were able to kind of bounce back at the end and, win about 50 games. But it just doesn't look good right now. And I don't really know. We talked about it. I don't know what the answer is for this because, you look at the game, you look at the games they've had and the way they've been playing. And even though it's a different coach and, there are some guys on the roster that are new additions, it just hasn't worked, right? Like in this last game, I mean, Beal was not very good. He was 3 for 12. But, even like their other guys, like Booker, I think this season has kind of been up and down. The role players have been kind of up and down. Obviously, we've talked about their center rotation, which is not very good.
Horrible.
But I don't really know what the fix is. You can't even blame Nurkic the last few games because he hadn't played because he's been in suspension
Hmm.
protocols or whatever. So I mean, like just in general, they're kind of a team where I have to feel like they're gonna try to do something because I mean they didn't put together this roster just to basically be an irrelevant team. I mean, like in last season they had kind of stretches up and down stretches like this, but we went into the season, I think, expecting the Suns to, at the very least, regular season wise, be better, right? I still didn't quite believe in them as much from a playoff standpoint, but we had both of us picked them as an over. And this is definitely, I think, going to be one where we're going to have to bite the bullet on this one because, I mean, in order for them to get over 50 wins, I mean, they're going to have to go, what? They're going to have to go, what, like 35 and like 10 or 15 or something like that. I just don't really think that that's going to happen.
Yeah, this team is horrible. Like I don't even know where to begin. Well, I actually do know where to begin. I think the trio clearly is not working because obviously if they're a trio, this elite in quotes, they shouldn't be 15 and 18. So I think one of them has to go and you have to get a haul of just certified talent that you can put on the bench and even maybe insert into the starting lineup to bolster up, the versatility of the team. Because that's my problem. They're not very versatile. They do a lot of the same things, and then when the bench guys come in, it doesn't look pretty. So that it's very similar to Denver in terms of the bench quality, I would say. But overall, very very disappointed in this team because I think there was a lot of hype and noise around this team
Sure.
potentially making a huge run after a failure of one last postseason. So, this might be one of the most disappointing teams in the league right now.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like, this is right there. I think with Minnesota,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of I think those are definitely the two most disappointing teams
Yeah.
of the season, just because. And with the Wolves, remember the expectations for them were pretty high. I think the expectations were lowered a little bit with the Randall deal, but there were a lot of people, not necessarily us, but there were a lot of people who did actually like the deal more for Minnesota than the Knicks. But yeah, with the Suns, I don't know. Again, like I know last season around this time, like later on, they bounced back and proceeded to get to 50 wins or whatever. But as we talked about, you just can't play through the play-in realistically, and be able to contend for the title. Because looking back, obviously the Lakers and the Heat, they made their deep runs through the play-in. The Heat got to the finals, but outside of that, if you actually look, none of the other teams that have been in the play-in have won a series, right? Because I mean, just in general, it's too hard. Because if you're in the play-in, that you're probably in there for a reason. And
Yeah.
I mean, other teams have had injuries as well. It's just they've been able to kind of build up enough wins to kind of weather the storm. Like the Mavs, obviously, have just been devastated even beyond the Luka injury, and they've been kind of dropping down the standings as a result. But just as a whole, it just feels like it's not working. And that was kind of my concern that I had going into the season with the team was I just felt like the core is it just doesn't work, right? Like, and I think, there's a reason why this formula, the big three and a bunch of role players just doesn't work anymore in the NBA. The league's a little bit too talented. And I think if your big three, like say we're mostly, two of the three were two-way guys, like elite two-way players, it would work, but that's just not the case with this grouping. Not that none of them can't play defense, but like they're not necessarily known for their defense, aside I guess from Durant. But even then, still just as a trio, it just doesn't work. And I don't really know what you can do because Beal again has a no trade clause. Um, And again, what are you trading him for? Like, I don't know. They may just kind of be stuck. So I don't really know what they can really do there, but I think it's a team to watch out for. And then Minnesota is the other team where the situation is kind of just sad at this point, right? Where like they had a game the other day where uh they're playing the Pistons, right? And it's like early on kind of competitive, and then before you know it, they're down like 20. They're getting blown out. Edwards has over 50 points in the game, and it doesn't matter, right? Because like for most of the game, a lot of the other guys couldn't really do much of anything, on offense, right? Obviously, that came after the game where he, kind of mentioned, how he's kind of been turned into, a different type of player, right? Just because of how the team is, and I think you can kind of tell without him coming out and saying it. Like I think he didn't like them dealing cat, because it was a big, piece to the team. And
Hmm.
it's funny because like with the Randall thing, if you look at the counting stats, like they're not even really bad. When you look at his numbers, like his efficiency, has been pretty good this season, right? I mean, he's given them 20 and 7 and 4.5. He's shooting 48 from the field, 37 from three. It's just the combination of these guys doesn't work. Obviously, we talked about it with the Conley piece. Him just kind of falling off the map really hurts because now they don't really have a stabilizing force at all. I mean, if you look at his numbers, I mean, he's at 8 and 4 compared to 11 and 6 last season, but the percentages, I mean, 35 from the field, 36 from three. Just not good. I mean, it kind of feels like he might be kind of, basically done at this point, but you don't have anybody to replace him. I mean, yeah, you could swap him out with Nikhil Alexander Walker, but that's just a different type of player. I think Dillingham is hurt, so you can't really put him in, and he doesn't even really play anyway. So, and I don't think it'd be, I don't think you can really expect a rookie to kind of save this situation. And that's the disappointing part because I think both you and I think we were on the. I think neither of us thought Minnesota would be better. I think we thought it would be different.
Hmm.
I think the thing that we didn't expect is them to not only be worse, but to just not be that good. I think that's kind of the problem because I think we expected them to at least be a little bit worse, but I think we still expected them to be, one of the, key playoff teams because we still said I remember going into the season we're like OKC, Denver, Memphis, or not Memphis, Dallas, and then I think we had the Wolves still kind of there, but unfortunately, like it just not only have they not been that great, they do not look like a contender right now at all. I mean, they're a 500 team, and we're almost halfway through the season compared to last season. I mean, they had almost 30 wins at this point.
Yeah, I think the only positive that you can really take away from this season so far for the Timberwolves is at least it's not Ant. I don't think he's the problem at all. It's for sure, the lack of contributions from your a couple of your new additions, but overall, just the team
Yeah.
is just not cohesive at all. It clearly is not working. You're not getting enough offense from McDaniels. Mike Conley, like you said, is pretty much fallen off the map. You have no real point guard depth. Um, and then Randall, like you said, as good of numbers as he has, there's still some severe chemistry issues. And definitely, I think, with a game like Randall's, you can argue sometimes it takes away from Ants, I think, a little bit more than, uh, Towns did. So I think that's the big issue because, with Towns and Edwards, you could at least see, some good pick and roll sets, and they can run like, 5 out if Gobert isn't on the floor. But, it's just different because Randall is so isolation heavy versus Towns could, be a spot up or a post up. So,
Yeah, it's just tough. I mean, it's kind of veering into like could this possibly be one of the worst trades in recent memory? Like it's starting to get pretty close to that point. And again, the guy that you traded for isn't bad. It's
nope.
just look at what the guy that you gave up is doing for the other team.
Yep.
Hopefully he's all right because I know at the end of the Knicks Bulls game they got blown out and now they've lost a couple of games back to back. But he got hurt at the end of a game that was kind of already decided, so I don't really know what he was even doing out there. But hopefully he's doing fine.
Yeah.
They haven't said anything since then, so my guess is that hopefully he's okay, but we'll see about that. But just the fact again, that's the part that hurts. It's not just that you move Towns to another team, but he's been playing basically the best basketball of his career and has kind of elevated that team, whereas your team is down in the gutter right now. I mean, it's like I said, they're 10th in the Western Conference. Of course, this could always change, but they got to get some wins. I mean, like, the Clippers are seventh. They're 5 games above 500. Kawhi just came back, right, in a game in which they dominated the Hawks, right? So,
Yeah.
we can talk about that, I guess, if we want. But it's going to get tougher from here on out to be able to kind of for these teams to squeeze their way back in because, these other teams, if they don't, they got to make runs because of the fact that, like, some of these other teams, I mean, a lot of the teams at the top have kind of stabilized because they've had injuries. Like the Grizzlies have been 500 in the last 10. The Nuggets are 6-4. The Mavs are 4-6. Right. The Lakers were 7-3. They just lost the game to the Rockets.
Yeah.
But
Houston 6-4.
just yeah, exactly. So I mean, just in general, like some of these teams below them can get there, but if you're like the Wolves, the Spurs are a little bit different because I don't think it's like a completely lost cause if they're like at the bottom of the play-in. I mean, them being there in general is a complete success. But for these other teams, like say Golden State or heaven forbid, Phoenix or Sacramento, maybe they've woken up because now they've won 3 in a row. Well, but just in general, they got to start packing on some wins. I think for the Warriors, in fairness to them, their schedule eases up. So there's a world where they can probably make up some ground and get some wins. It's just, again, just in general, as we talked about, it's just very difficult to have to pull yourself out of the play-in and then stay above the play-in because just to be in the play-in, just to get out of the play-in, you got to win a ton of games. And then after that, you lose a few games, then you're right back down. Like, I mean, that's just kind of how it goes. Like, say, like Golden State, if they lose this Sacramento game, then, and they're down by, almost 30 in the third, then, I mean, they'll be right back at 9 after winning back-to-back games, including one without Steph. So, just in general, I don't know. It's starting to feel like this roadmap might be what we're looking at in terms of the Western Conference, but a couple of teams I'm just a little bit surprised at how poorly they've played. Mainly the Phoenix one, because I think a lot of the teams from like 7 to 10, well, other than Minnesota, right? Minnesota and Phoenix, those are the two surprises. But most of the other teams we expected, the Clippers feel like they've overachieved. And like I said, now they've got Kawhi back, so that's a good thing for them. But just as a whole, just kind of a wild mix of these teams, in the Western Conference. I mean, what do you think about all of this?
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I didn't think the season was going to go like this at all. It's some aspects don't surprise me, but a lot does. Like you said with the Clippers and them being able to stay afloat with kind of a similar approach to Golden State, but it's actually working. They have tons of talent. And they have a lot of players that I think you and I both like. But now that Kawhi is coming back, they have a serious chance to actually jump in the standings. I think because there's some teams that are above them that are kind of gasping for air, like you already said. So there's a possibility that they kind of sneak in with a little bit of luck. And then I'm surprised about how close it is after pretty much Oklahoma City, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Like Denver, LA, Dallas, they're pretty much in a big race, Clippers included. So that's pretty cool. And then obviously the Spurs being in the mix, I think is amazing for that organization and the league as a whole because your next potential faces, I think as advertised. So that's pretty cool. And then obviously the teams at the bottom, I don't even know what to say. There's one is not like the other. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
So, that the Phoenix one is really tough. And I think, like you said, they're going to have to make some significant moves to improve. And, whether that be moving a star or, I guess, compartmentalizing all those guys on the bench and, maybe getting some better quality guys, we'll see. But they're in a tough situation because, yes, as bad as their record is, financially, they're pretty much cooked too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's funny because I think we talked about it. We're going into the season. We expected OKC to kind of run away with the Western Conference, and that's
No
basically what's
surprise.
happened. Except it's been even without Chet. So I think if that continues, I think SGA might get the MVP, despite the crazy year that Jokic is having. Now, if Denver can stay afloat, if they can somehow get into that top 3, which they could, because they're certainly not far from it, but then maybe he has a chance. But with the way OKC is, I mean, they're on pace for close to like 70 wins, just like Cleveland. I mean, they're right there with the Cavs.
It's
So,
amazing.
I mean, if they get anywhere close to that, I don't really see how he couldn't get it at that point. I mean, like, that'd be kind of, that wouldn't be a good look at all, I think, by the time you get there. But, of course, there's still a ton of basketball left. Then when you look over in the East, I mean, again, you have the Cavs who are kind of a decent ways away from. I mean, they're 5.5 games back of Boston, which is a decent amount. Not insurmountable, but a decent amount. Then you got the Knicks, the Magic. It's rough because then Jalen Suggs he got hurt in the game a couple days ago. He got, I think, wheeled off, right? He had a back issue. There's no reporting that like it's a back injury that's going to keep him out for like a long stretch.
Hmm.
So hopefully maybe it's just like a bad injury that might keep him out for a few games, but just a nightmarish stretch for the Magic. And somehow they're able to stay afloat because they're still fourth in the Eastern Conference despite having stretches where their three best players have not played. And one of those guys has only played in 5 games. So I don't know how they do it. I mean, you look at the last 10, 4 and 6, but just the context provided is just kind of remarkable. Then below them, right, you got the Bucks who have kind of been sleepwalking the last 10 games, right? Then you got the Heat, and they just got annihilated back to back, right? Once by the Pacers. That was, one of the weird Jimmy games, and then this one by Utah without him. They don't look good at all, so they probably will slide. Hawks have been reeling, and then that kind of opens the door for the Pacers and the Pistons, who now are 7-3 in their last 10 games. The Pistons unfortunately lost Jaden Ivey, but they
Hmm.
just keep on winning. The Pacers, Halliburton's back to, playing at an elite level, so that's great to see. So they have a chance to make up some ground here, those two teams. And then the Sixers, they're 7-3 in their last 10, but they just had a couple of bad losses, right? Where they had lost to Sacramento without Embiid, and then they lost to Golden State with Embiid. They got a big win over the Nets, and they got a relatively lax schedule the next few games. But as we talked about, that's the tough part of starting the season off so poorly because you just have so much ground to make up, little room for error, and these teams that not as many people expected to be ahead of them are. Like even the Bulls are still ahead of them,
Yeah,
right? Like I
right.
mean, they're 16-19 while the Sixers are 14-19. Not that that's necessarily going to stay. Maybe they trade Vucevic or somebody like that, but that's the downside of losing so many of those type of games early on. And obviously their excuse was so many guys were out. But as we talked about, that's kind of one of the reasons where it's kind of hard to buy into Philly doing a whole lot this season. I mean, of course, I don't think they're going to fall out of the play-in. But if you're Philly, you don't really want to be in the play-in at all, just because of the fact that, again, you have a bad half in the play-in as the lower seed, and your season is completely over, right? So they're going to probably make up some ground because, like I said, I expect the Heat to probably drop. Maybe the Hawks do. I don't know. They've been pretty bad as of late, but just as a whole, the Eastern Conference is kind of flushing out too. And again, we're at the halfway point in the season. And like I said, that's the thing about the NBA. It's very long. So of course, we can move 30 games from now and it could look a little bit different. But I think at the very least, we're getting a pretty good idea of which are the real teams to buy into and which teams, might be good, but, at best are probably more puncher's chance teams. And then the ones that are just probably completely cooked. I think we're getting a good, sense of that right
Yeah.
now.
With the East, I think spots 5 through 11. So pretty much Milwaukee, Miami, Atlanta, Indiana, Detroit, Chicago, and Philadelphia. That's kind of what I'm watching because it's so tight. And I think it's probably going to be a photo finish because I don't foresee all these teams being healthy and definitely not playing the same way that they are right now towards the end of the season. But overall, I've been very surprised and actually pretty happy with the Eastern Conference play. I love that Detroit is making, a name for themselves, and having a little bit of a resurgence. And, Indiana, like you said, Halliburton back on track. Atlanta, not as good recently, but still, the fact that they're in the mix, I think, says a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But then, the stories that I'm not too high on, obviously Miami, where it's like, with all this drama, where
Mm-hmm.
do you go from here? Milwaukee, this is kind of the more, I think, realistic version of what we're gonna get with the Bucks going forward. Just kind of up and down play, but Giannis being amazing at the top end. But then, Philly is kind of lagging back there, and that's kind of what a lot of people predicted and, felt about this team where,
Yeah.
you have a bunch of guys that can't really stay healthy. But I think there are some positives to look at. Like, I think I've been pretty impressed with what Maxi's been able to do this season, but, in general, not
Yeah.
not good cumulatively.
Kings maybe looking at making a run with Devin Carter back in the mix, possibly.
Yeah,
So
true. I did he made his debut, right?
yeah, he did. He did.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came back. I want to say, in their game before tonight, I think is when he made his debut. I want to say that was the Memphis game.
Okay. Nice.
So yeah, so just as yeah, so we'll see what he does because that was a guy that I was kind of high on
Me
going
too.
into the draft. But obviously he's had to work his way back from a shoulder injury. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just what a ride with the NBA season so far, and unfortunately the Pelicans are not a part of it. So
Yep. Continues, man.
um, yeah, but going on now into news rumors. So it looks like, according to Mark Stein, we got a few things kind of coming out. So according to him, one of the things that he's saying is Raptors are resisting a Jakob Poeltl trade. However, Toronto is willing to deal Kelly Olynyk and Bruce Brown. So these are the type of players that we talked about where you could give up possibly seconds for these type of guys. These are guys that could possibly fortify, either your second units or maybe Bruce Brown could be like a spot starter for some of these teams. It's just for Brown, the only issue is the contract is pretty large. I mean, he makes, what, like 23 million or whatever it is. And so a team is going to have to kind of just be willing to give up, you know, a little bit in terms of contracts in order to get him. Olynyk, I think, what is he at? Isn't he at like, 12-ish million or so? So not quite as much. But just in general, those are guys that I think could be relatively gettable players for teams. Yeah, and again, they have some utility, right? Because Olynyk is a big that can space the floor and is a decent passer. And then Bruce Brown, right? Obviously, he was a part of that Nuggets title team, right? Kind of a gritty, defensive-minded guy. That can be athletic and physical. Hasn't played much this season because he's been dealing with. He had a knee surgery, I think, that he had, and he just came back. I want to say like a week or so ago. But these could be the type of players that could possibly help some teams out for a stretch run. And then Mark Stein also mentioned, a couple of teams interested in Cam Johnson, Grizzlies, Pacers, and Kings, which are teams that we didn't hear about initially. So what do you think about those?
I actually like those a lot. I feel like
Mm.
all three of those guys are really utility guys anywhere that they go.
Mm-hmm.
But I am probably more intrigued with Cam Johnson just because of the larger sample size this season.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, Olynyk's been hurt for a lot of the season, and then obviously Bruce Brown as well. So, yeah, like I said, I think all those guys are really slottable anywhere as long as you can really afford them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, honestly, that's that. I do kind of wonder where do we think Cam Johnson at this point is. And obviously, we could possibly do like an episode before the deadline where we're kind of making predictions about where guys are going to go. But I guess we know, I think we believe at this point Johnson probably gets moved. It's just a matter of where does he actually go, and that's where I'm not sure because there's teams all over that have kind of come out because I think again like you mentioned, the sample size that he's displayed in Brooklyn suggests like this guy's a quality rotational player that can help out a team. Certainly as a 3-point shooter and as a wing sized guy, it's just a matter of which team is going to be willing to give up the most. Like this, like does a team actually end up overpaying and give up like
Mm.
a first or two? Or is it just like, or is it kind of like, that probably doesn't happen. Maybe it's like a protect. I don't know because, the Grizzlies were willing to give up a protected first for, Dorian Finney-Smith. So I'd have to imagine, if you're willing to do that for him, like I'd have to imagine you'd be willing to give up a full first
Yeah,
for
I think they
Johnson.
will. They will.
Yeah. It's just a matter of which team, is the one that pays up the most. And
True.
I do kind of wonder because like you said, I like the fit for all three teams for Memphis, for Indiana, and for Sacramento. I'm just curious which team is actually willing, to do the deal. Which team, like, which team probably benefits the most from getting him. I guess you could say maybe Memphis just because of
Mm.
the fact that like they were already, in the mix of contenders, whereas the Pacers and Kings weren't necessarily. But then but he could fit in either of those, either any of those three teams. But OKC, people have mentioned that if they get him, things like that. So I like you said, I think we talked about it way back when, I think in the summer or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that he's a guy that can easily plug and play onto a lot of teams. The contract isn't necessarily plug and play. That's kind of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But the player, you can easily find a role for him,
Yeah.
regardless of, what happens.
Yeah. Lights out shooter, bro.
Yeah. Mark Stein also mentioned that Matt Ishbia, right, that's the team governor for Phoenix, is willing to sign Butler to a lucrative new contract. So we continue to hear more stuff about, Jimmy Butler and the Suns. we know the team governor for the Suns, right, has been a guy that's been willing to make some pretty splashy moves, right? He traded for Durant, traded for Beal, traded Ayton away, and maybe he moves Jimmy Butler, but again, you still got to get past the no trade clause for Beal. And do the Heat even want Bradley Beal? When they already got like a hero, who I maybe might just stick around at this point.
I
I
think
don't
so.
know, but yeah, it's just in general. I don't know. I mean, again, there's a lot of talk about the Suns thing, but just the fact that there's so much talk about it, we've talked about it before, where it just feels like when that type of thing happens, it's possible that it doesn't happen. Like, we had an entire summer of, Golden State is interested in Paul George. They're interested in marketing, but, do they want to give up Kaminga? Do they want to give up Pods? And it's like back and forth in the deals. Like, we'll do this, but not for this. Then none of it happens. So we've heard a lot about it. Like I said, I'm prepared for anything. I'm prepared for him to go to the Kings, possibly. Like, who knows at this point? But just in general, as we said, we expect him to get moved at this point. It's gonna happen. It's just a matter of where and a matter of when.
Yeah, I'm curious. But yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the Phoenix move. I get it, but like you said,
Right.
it's really
Yeah.
on one
I
person only. So
like I said, I just don't have like an ideal spot in my head at
yeah,
all.
I
Like,
know.
I just think, and it's the combination of, you got to give up so much to get him, and then in doing so, whatever team that does that, are they actually like in an ability to still try to contend and win? That's the problem that I have, like, with the Golden State one. I'm not as big of a fan of that as maybe some people are, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just overthinking it. Maybe if he's healthy and he plays and you see him in action, then it just looks great, on one of those teams. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
one last rumor: Walker Kessler.
Mm-hmm.
Jazz moving big man, not realistic. Now, this is a guy that I feel like we've heard in trade rumors a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't really know why. I guess there's a possibility of, like, he's in year 3, so next summer, if they want to keep him, they got to sign him to an extension. But I don't really feel like you have to trade him. You know what I mean? Like, unless
Yeah,
you just
agreed.
don't really want to pay him, which maybe that's what it is. I don't know, but but I can also understand why they want a decent amount for him, because he's a very good shot blocker. He's had a bounce back year this year, so he's been much better than last year. When I think last year you kind of wondered, like, hey, what's going on? He's not really playing that well, which is good to see. If he were to get moved to a team, I think that'd be an awesome move. But I don't really see the point as to why Utah would move him. I mean, like, they're not really. I mean, I know they won a couple of games recently, but, like, they haven't exactly won a ton of games with him playing well. Now, part of it is marketing hasn't been as good, but they're also not really interested in winning a ton of games right now, anyways. And they got a weird team, so they kind of have to figure out. Like, there are other guys on the Jazz that I would probably prioritize. Like, we should probably move these guys over Walker Kessler. I don't think you have to move Walker Kessler in a way where I think you should at least try to move some of the more veteran type guys on the roster.
Yeah, he's awesome. I think he's one of the more underrated,
Yeah.
big backup bigs, or whatever you want to call him, in the league. So, you know, I, I mean, realistically, I would keep him because I think he's a good young piece that you can, continuously move forward. And sorry, I said backup, but starting center. So, I am kind of curious, what his development looks like long term because, after the sophomore slump, he's looked pretty freaking good. So, um, I'm assuming that he's garnering a lot of value, which is probably why they don't want to get rid of him. So it makes sense.
Yeah, and yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, they've mentioned, like, the giving up first, and it's like if I were another team, I would want to get him. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, if I'm Utah, I don't know if I would want to give him up unless
I don't.
somebody's gonna give up a lot, like multiple firsts.
Right.
Because the thing is, his contract is so small because he's a late first round pick, so you're not getting player compensation. It would be draft compensation,
Mm-hmm.
but I just, like, people have mentioned LA, and, like, he'd be awesome in LA, but, like, if I'm Utah, I mean, like, unless you're willing to give up both firsts, then I'm not doing it. And then if you're LA, are you going to be willing to give up 2 firsts for Walker Kessler? Some people might, but some people may not be. And I don't think that LA's front office would do that. I don't believe that they would give up 2 firsts for Walker. I just don't think they're going to give up those first period.
Agreed.
Both of them, maybe one, but I don't think they give both of them up at all. I just, again, obviously I don't know people in the organization, but based off of the type of moves they've been doing, the last few years, I don't see them doing that. So like, but if he were to get picked up by a team, I think it would, be immediate dividends. And he could start for those teams. Like he doesn't need to be a backup. I understand like for, people talk about like, oh, sometimes if you have two bigs, maybe you have spacing issues, maybe you got problems guarding people on the perimeter. But, he's, like you can find a way to make it work, I think. Like,
Yeah.
he's not like he's, a bozo or anything like,
No.
I mean, obviously you don't want him necessarily switched out onto the perimeter, but he's such a good interior defender and rebounder that, I just think if you have the personnel, to kind of make up for that, like you should be fine.
Yeah.
I would trade for him if I was another team. I just don't know if Utah is doing it.
Yeah. Agreed.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, we appreciate everybody helping us over these last couple of years to help this channel grow, right? It's kind of been a ride because we started doing this, during that 2022-2023 NBA season. Obviously, since this is the anniversary, we didn't start at the beginning of the season, but, just the fact that we've kind of been here for the last few seasons in terms of observing, everything that's happened in the NBA and all these conversations. We just appreciate each and every one of you for continuing to grow this channel with us. So obviously, as we've mentioned before many times, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you leave a comment, we'll read it at the beginning of the episode. See you next episode.